Watchers in the Fourth Dimension.
What is it I got in my bag? What's that thing you strain ice with?
Dead men do not require oxygen.
That's what it is. I've got a memory like a sieve.
Hello and welcome back to Watchers in the Fourth Dimension. I'm Anthony.
I'm Julie.
And I'm Reilly, and he stole our brains.
This episode, we're going to be discussing the legendary, unfinished but sort of eventually finished story Shada. But before we get onto that, Julie's going to take a look at the mail. Over to you, Julie.
All right, I'm going to be covering mail from the creature from the pit. I will say that I've had to shrink a lot of these, and there might be a few that I missed, but we had a lot of mail. From Mark Dunstan, we have, what a fantastically crap story. Really a shit show. Agreed. The only two things that were outstanding were the filmed jungle and the end of credits on episode 4.
Wow.
I love it. And Wright says, this felt like Myra Francis' audition tape to play the Queen of Hearts, but instead of yelling off with his head, she always threatens throw them in the pit. 3 out of 10 random bearded guys roaming the woods.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with random bearded guys.
All right, Seamus68 says, this story is bad, but Underworld is definitely worse.
No.
In which we responded, we beg to differ.
Yeah, hard disagree.
Kieran James Evans says, I don't really have much to say about this one. No VHS nostalgia here. Some nice dialogue, but the story is thin and generally a 3-part version would be a massive improvement. The teach yourself Tibetan jokes is equal parts funny and crap. Thank you for at least seeing my side. A 3 ? Redacted, doing unmentionable things to redacted.
All right.
There's some really great ones in here, guys. Austin D. Patterson says, if you guys are recasting this story, I'd like to submit my audition tape for Lady Adrasta. It's just a video of me screaming, no, at the top of my lungs until I lose my voice.
You're hired.
It'll be wonderful. Nathan Laws, again, I had to shrink some of this, but I still tried to leave a good bit of it, says, I largely agree with the Watcher's comments on this one. It's crazy to me that David Fisher wrote one good and one great story in the previous season and couldn't even manage middling in season 17. The story's failings aren't all his fault, but a large part of it is, since I think horrible sets and a poorly realized monster could be forgiven with a fantastic story with fantastic dialogue. This wasn't that. Agreed. I will say that it's a bit unfair of Julie to criticize that fandom says that the 4th Doctor is the best Doctor from one story because, 1, all Doctors have some bad ones, it's the aggregate that matters, and 2, best Doctor and best storylines are not the same thing. You can love a Doctor's performance while not feeling like they got the best stories and vice versa. Most people love Tom's performance as the Doctor better than they like other Doctors' performances. Most people who talk about the errors will differentiate the Philip Hinchcliffe era from the Graham Williams era. It is broadly accepted by fandom that the Hinchcliffe era was the one with the fantastic stories and Williams' era was a decline. I would like to argue that it's not based on one story. I can still say that he's not my favorite, and I think that the fandom is wrong, but that's okay. We all have our own opinions.
And life would be jolly boring if we didn't.
Exactly. And then he says, like Anthony, I like the teach yourself Tibetan gag. That is an obvious Douglas Adams inclusion and pretty funny.
I take it back. Nathan is a very wise man and correct on everything.
I thought that might happen. Our friend Errol Gray says, hello, Watchers. You know, I think I enjoy your show the most when you really dislike a story. I think we like covering them as well. Anyway, I agree this one is mighty rough, but I don't hate it as much as you. There are interesting and fun little wrinkles that appeal to me. I love that, much as the Sunmakers, the Doctor recognizes an unjust capitalist system and, rather than just transferring wealth and continuing the cycle, he opts to destroy the system entirely. 100% Rebel Time Lord, and I love it. I didn't think of it that way, but I suppose you're right. Although it didn't really feel like a capitalist system because she kind of got in there towards the beginning and ran with it.
Yeah, it's more of an oligarchy in this story.
Next, I love the teach yourself Tibetan gag too, Anthony. I'm a little upset that there's so much of this. I'm glad Reilly called out the SM appeal of the huntsman's outfit because, or, hello, Jungle Zaddy. If I can wrestle it off him, can I keep it? It would be great for convention cosplay and also fetish balls.
Wow.
I had to go there.
I mean, we're not going to tell you what you can and can't do.
There is a range of streets in New Orleans named for the muses of Greek myth, and one of them was Erato. So I always think of a big green blob with suggestive appendages when I park there. I love when my favorite things combine. He had some of the best. It's fine. John Thomas Casey says, haven't watched this one in many, many years. I knew this would be rough on you all, but had no idea just how rough. I personally enjoy the Space Pirates a bit more than this, I think. At least that has some fun supporting characters and one of the best TARDIS teams ever. For the record, I never really loved Lalla Ward as Romana, though I do enjoy the character generally, and of course, Tam was great. Lalla almost seems that's the way she is in reality or something. I listen to her Big Finish audios, and she just sounds bored or like she's talking down to the audience. Not all the time, but especially in some of the narrated companion chronicles. Just my opinion, of course. I know plenty of people love the performance, and that's great. Again, I think we've commented a little bit on that as well.
I can understand that a bit. Sometimes when you watch an actor, you feel that they're pulling something of themselves into it instead of trying to be a completely different person. And I think I agree in regards to her portrayal of Romana. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Not at all. I think it fits for the character, but not necessarily my cup of tea. I think she is not including certain characteristics to Romana that Mary Tam added, but that's just me.
He also then goes on to say, anyway, the Dickie jokes were flying fast and furious this Watchers episode, and I think there are 1 or 2 points I couldn't breathe from laughter. Well done, Watchers. You made this one a lot more fun than the story itself. I love when we can do that for you. I am kind of sad Julie didn't get to do a Where There's a Whip, There's a Way rendition, though. Not sure there's any upcoming story here, something similar would be appropriate, but I think by now her love of the animated Lord of the Rings is quite clear. And if it's not clear, it's the animated Lord of the Rings and the live-action Lord of the Rings. All of it is amazing. And the books. Don't forget the books. Our friend J. David Holt says, I can't remember anything about it apart from the questionable creature design, and when going into the episode, I was getting it confused with one of the stories from the next season. But as I enjoyed the unintentional comedy that comes from how bad it is, I'll give it 3 luminescent phalluses out of 10.
Wow.
There's some really good ones, everyone. Just a few more. Doctor Who, 60s, 70s, and 80s says, you guys definitely do not enjoy Looney Tunes Tom, do you? I think the other 2 do.
Mm-hmm.
I do. It's just sometimes there's too much Looney Tunes. Sometimes you got to dial it back a bit. That's all. In moderation.
And then they go on to say, all I'll say is that I think you'll miss him when he's gone. It definitely is possible. The 12th Rising says, there are some good ideas in this story, such as a society trying to survive in a world where they have exhausted the metals and minerals of it. Hey, they didn't exhaust it. It was being hoarded. But Erator as a monster is a disaster. There is a lot of bad acting alongside the nonsensical plot, while Lady Adrasta is bad because she shouts a lot, and there is no nuance to her character. David Brearley as the new voice of K9 isn't a patch on John Gleason. Only Tom Baker and guest star Jeffrey Belden, with his sparking performance as Argonon, come out in the story with some sort of dignity intact. I agree. Last but not least, David Gorton says, I'm going to buck the trend here and say that I love this story.
All right.
No, just kidding. It really is terrible.
Oh.
Truly and utterly awful. Largely for the reasons that the panel discussed in the episode, 2-dimensional characters, a script that often doesn't make sense, and obviously Douglas Adams' style humor, which doesn't fit in the same way it did in City of Death. Are there any positives? Well, Jeffrey Belden is obviously having fun with the part of Orgonon, and some of the music is quite atmospheric, especially when the Doctor's in the pit. Shame the story doesn't merit such a score. So for those 2 reasons, a very generous 2.5 indigestible chicken legs out of 10.
For a second there, I thought we were going to actually get a dissenting voice, and I got a little bit excited.
Yeah, so did I.
And that's the mail.
Thank you for that, Julie. And as a reminder to our listeners, we really do love getting your feedback, thoughts, comments, and questions, and we do try to read out as many as possible on the show. So please do get in touch. As always, you can contact us through Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Watchers4D, or you can email us at watchers4d@gmail.com. Additionally, we would absolutely love it if you subscribe to the podcast, if you're not doing so already, and if you dropped us a review or rating on your podcast platform of choice. Anyway, let's get to talking about the making of Shada, and as you would expect, this one is an absolute mess. There's also a lot here, so if this is your least favorite segment of the show, skip ahead 10 to 15 minutes. As we've discussed before, producer Graham Williams and script editor Douglas Adams had intended that season 17 would bring in fresh writers to the show. However, none of these new writers had been able to actually produce suitable scripts. Williams had already had to proceed with one story, The Horns of Nimon, despite concerns about its strength, and by late June 1979, he was still searching for an appropriate season finale. By this stage, with Williams considering leaving the show, he wanted the last story of the season to be particularly memorable, and with that in mind, he had allocated the year's budget so that the season finale would actually have a decent budget, unlike the season finales in the previous 2 seasons. Eventually, Williams was left with no other choice but to seek permission for Adams to write the 6-part finale himself, despite the BBC usually frowning upon script editors writing for their own show. Permission was formally requested in mid-July 1979 and granted 1 month later in mid-August. Of course, Adams had been working on the script since the end of June. They would have been hosed if they had been turned down. Initially, Adams considered developing an idea he had for a 2-part serial in which the Doctor retired, only to find himself constantly summoned out of seclusion. Williams rejected this because he felt that the idea would be perceived as self-mockery. Instead, Adams decided that he wanted to once more delve into the legends of Gallifrey. Williams had sought to actively avoid this since the invasion of time because he had thought that the Time Lords had become overused. However, it was now agreed that this would present an opportunity for the show to do a story about capital punishment by exploring what a highly advanced civilization would do with their worst criminals. To help ease Williams's concern over the Time Lords, Adams decided to set the adventure away from Gallifrey itself. He chose instead his birth town of Cambridge, and especially his alma mater, the University of Cambridge. This would permit Adams to draw upon his own experiences as a university student. However, Adams was also extremely busy working on various iterations of his own project, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Consequently, he and Williams worked together on what was initially known as Sunburst, much as they had done while reworking City of Death earlier in the season. However, Williams decided that Adams should receive the sole credit on the scripts in consideration of the fact that Adams's writing career would undoubtedly continue beyond his time on Doctor Who. One of Williams's chief concerns about making this story was to ensure that costs remained manageable, and so they deliberately kept the cast of characters very small. Sunburst evolved quickly. Adams was not entirely happy with his initial scripts, which he felt were bloated, so some changes were made. Chronotis was originally killed off in episode 2, but Adams had become fond of the character and decided to bring him back. Adams named the university students Chris Parsons and Claire Keatley after his friend Chris Keatley, who was president of the Cambridge Footlights. That's the kind of famous amateur dramatics society at Cambridge. The think tank scientists bore names associated with Greek islands where Adams had recently vacationed. And amusingly, the Part 1 joke in which Professor Chronotis forgot that he had a mind like a sieve was taken from a story that Adams had written when he was just 12 years old and had actually been published in a 1965 edition of the Eagle and Boys World magazine. Child prodigy right there. At the beginning of August, head of serials Graham MacDonald, our old friend who seems to have something to say on everything, wrote to Williams to comment on Sunburst. He agreed with Adams's assessment that the serial was too thin for its 6-episode length, although his suggestion that the material be expanded with a romantic subplot between Romana and Chris Parsons was thankfully ignored.
Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, boy.
By late August, the adventure had been retitled Shada. Originally, its director was intended to be Michael Hayes, who had last worked on City of Death. However, Hayes was unavailable and was replaced by Pennant Roberts, who we most recently saw directing Season 16's The Pirate Planet, also written by Adams. Joining Pennant Roberts' behind-the-scenes team, we have John Nathan Turner continuing as production unit manager, although he was co-credited in this role with Kathleen Bidmead. This appears to be her only credit in anything, ever, so who knows where she came from or what she did afterwards. Seriously, if you're listening and you actually know the answer to that, please do write in and let us know. As designer, we have Vic Meredith making his only contribution to the show. He worked on The Duchess of Duke Street, for which he was nominated for a BAFTA, The Tripods, and a bit of Fry and Laurie. As costumer, we have the return of Robert Jarvis for the fourth and final time. We'd previously seen him handle Season 15's Underworld, Season 16's The Stones of Blood, and Nightmare of Eden from earlier in this season. And it's probably safe to assume that if this had made it to post-production, we would have had Dudley Simpson making his final contribution to the show with this story. Unusually, we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive than we normally do on the filming of this story because it's quite relevant to what happened. All of the location filming for Shada began on the 15th of October 1979, taking place in the county of Cambridgeshire. The main item of the first day's filming was the Doctor and Romana hunting on the River Cam near King's College. And the same day, some of the scenes on the streets of Cambridge were filmed. The next day was spent in Grantchester for the death of the fisherman, plus the scenes in the field where Skagra's invisible ship landed, as well as on the nearby country road. Unfortunately, the all-too-familiar issues around strike action came to Doctor Who on this day. This was the latest in what was now virtually annual strike action, which had previously impacted the recording of both the Invasion of Time and the Armageddon Factor in the previous 2 years. In this instance, Roberts had booked 2 lighting crews for the ambitious nighttime chase sequence which was intended to form the ending of Part 2, which was due to be recorded on the 18th. Roberts' plan was to tape a scene with one team, while the other one went ahead to set up the next location. However, the unions realised that Doctor Who was an important target, and on the 16th, they summoned the lighting charge hand back to London. As a result, Roberts had to abandon a planned shot of the Doctor travelling to the Cavendish laboratory in Cambridge, where Chris was meant to have his lab. With the troubled location shoot concluded, effects work took place on October the 22nd at the BBC Television Film Studios in Ealing, London. Rehearsals for the first studio session then got underway, during which the scripts continued to be fine-tuned and many of the cast members contributed additional material. Recording began with a 3-day block from November the 3rd to the 5th, taking place at the BBC Television Centre in White City. Roberts' primary focus was the set for Chronotis' study, which was in use on all 3 days. The think tank scenes for Part 1 were taped on the first day, while those in the dilapidated version of the space station were completed on the last day. Work on the 5th of November also included sequences in the brig of Skagra's ship, together with some model shots. More model and effects works were scheduled for November the 15th and the 16th, but those sessions appear to have been cancelled, most likely due to the escalating strike action. Recording on Shada should have continued with a 2-day studio block on the 19th and 20th of November. Camera rehearsals went ahead as scheduled on the morning of that first day. After lunch, however, the cast and crew returned to the studio to find the doors locked. The labour dispute had forced the postponement of all recording at Television Centre. Although Roberts had hoped that work might resume on the 20th, the facilities remained shuttered. The fate of Shada was now unclear. 3 further studio days were planned for December the 1st to 3rd, but as the strike dragged on, Roberts' team was faced with a new problem. Many of the productions which had been impacted by the action were Christmas shows, which the BBC deemed to be critical to their broadcast schedule. Consequently, it was unlikely that Shada would retain its original recording dates, even if the strike was resolved in time. Roberts proceeded with rehearsals, but after meeting with MacDonald on November the 30th, Williams informed his director that production was to stand down. Coincidentally, the BBC reached an agreement with the unions later that same day. Eager for his final Doctor Who story to be completed, Williams continued to investigate the possibility of remounting the 5 abandoned studio days later in December. However, it quickly became clear that Shada could not be booked into the studio until at least January 1980, even assuming that the appropriate funding was secured. With the serial scheduled to begin transmission on January 19th, this sealed Shada's fate. And on December the 10th, it was officially decided that the Horns of Nimon would be the season finale of a shortened Season 17. This officially brought an end to the tenures of both Graham Williams and Douglas Adams on the show. Production unit manager John Nathan Turner, who had been trailing Williams since October, now became the show's new producer. He was joined by Barry Letts, whom MacDonald had given a watching brief over Nathan Turner in the new position of executive producer. While he was busy planning out his first season as producer, Nathan Turner had not forgotten about Shada. At the end of April 1980, the producer sent a revised set of scripts to Roberts to seek the director's input on the idea of completing the serial in the form of 2 50-minute episodes to air over Christmas 1980. The scheme was opposed by incoming script editor Christopher H. Bidmead, don't forget the H, who felt that Shada was out of keeping with the more serious style that he and Nathan Turner were pursuing. Plans for this remounted version of Shada moved forward, and it was intended that a minimal cast would reunite for a pair of 2-day studio blocks during October 1980. However, by late June, the project was abandoned when it turned out that the studio space would not be available. Despite this, Nathan Turner arranged for the existing Shada material to be preserved within the BBC archives for possible future use.
My man.
This is where the story's production officially ends. However, there's obviously more to the story because we watched it. And this is where we look to home video releases. In 1984, so 4 years after production, Noel Lydiard White of BBC Enterprises suggested to John Nathan Turner that Shada might be ready for release on video. At the time, the Doctor Who VHS range was still very much in its infancy, and in November 1985, Nathan Turner mooted the possibility of having the 6th Doctor, Colin Baker, fill in the missing material either with linking narration or in on-screen segments in which he would be telling the story of Shada to his companion Perry, as played by Nicola Bryant. Nothing came of this. Finally, in 1991, BBC Video scored notable commercial success with a series of special Doctor Who releases that had been overseen by John Nathan Turner, and this led him to approach Tom Baker about recording linking narration for Shada. Baker agreed on the condition that he would appear as himself and not as the 4th Doctor. He recorded several short clips at the beginning of February 1992 at the Doctor Who Behind the Sofa exhibition at the Museum of the Moving Image in London. David Reilly returned to record the rest of K9's dialogue, and various special effects were also added or refined. The video was released at the beginning of July, finally making Shada available to fans after more than 12 years. Although Shada was now commercially available, there remained a desire for a version which dramatized the entire narrative, and when Big Finish Productions began releasing original Doctor Who audio plays in 1999, one of executive producer Jason Haig-Ellery's early ideas was an adaptation of Shada. This project gained traction with BBC I, the team responsible for the BBC's official Doctor Who website, who helped secure the necessary permissions from the estate of Douglas Adams. At the time, Tom Baker was not interested in working with Big Finish, so Shada was rewritten for Paul McGann, whose 8th Doctor was the most recent to have appeared on television. Producer Gary Russell devised the notion that the events of the 5 Doctors, in which clips of Shada were used, had changed time so that the 4th Doctor's involvement in the adventure had been wiped from history, and the 8th Doctor would seek the help of Romana and K9 to set things right. But people still wanted to see the full version with the 4th Doctor, and in 2011, Doctor Who megafan Ian Levine privately funded animation to fill the gaps in the material recorded for Shada. Tom Baker didn't want to work with Levine, so he hired Paul Jones as the voice of the 4th Doctor. Reilly had passed away in 2008, and so John Leeson was brought in to provide the dialogue for K9. And Ian Levine hoped to reach an agreement with BBC Worldwide to create a new commercial release of Shada on DVD using his animation, but this never happened. But the notion of animating missing Doctor Who was starting to take off. In 2016, Patrick Troughton's debut adventure as the 2nd Doctor, 1966's The Power of the Daleks, was released in this form, with all 6 of its episodes fully recreated. It was decided that a new feature-length version of Shada should be prepared by director Charles Norton, mixing the existing live-action footage with animation and new special effects. The material was edited to rely only on existing clips of Reilly and Dennis Carey, who played Chronotis, and he had passed away in 1986. And this time, Tom Baker not only agreed to provide the Doctor's voice, but also to film a special live-action coda in character. And providing the incidental music at long last, we have Mark Ayres. Now, we haven't come across him yet in the show, but he will go on to be one of our composers in the Sylvester McCoy era, and since then has generally been responsible for all of the remastering of the audio for classic Doctor Who. So he's quite a big name in classic Doctor Who now. This version of Shada, the Omnibus Edition, was initially released as a digital download in November 2017. And as they were preparing for Season 17's eventual Blu Ray release in 2021, the Omnibus Edition was edited into a more traditional 6-part story, as Shada was originally intended, labeled the Definitive Edition. And this is the version that we will be discussing in this episode of the podcast. And before we get into discussing that, I'm going to hand over to Reilly because I've been talking too much for the short summary. Over to you, Reilly.
Thanks. Elton John and the Sphere from Phantasm roam around Cambridge to enjoy the beautiful scenery and to steal people's minds. The Doctor and Romana enjoy a life of leisure there until receiving a distress signal from Professor Chronotis, which is the quality of character naming I would expect from J.K. Rowling. So Elton John wants a Time Lord named Sally Avon. The Doctor and Romana want to stop him, and the serial, for some reason, wants to waste our time with Chris and Claire, as well as force us to listen to a Glee Club. In the end, we get the Doctor overcoming Skagra's plan for a universal mind despite the help of giant post-it monsters. The end.
All right.
Oh, okay.
I figured going short. I mean, nothing's going to top Saturday Night Fever, but we had a long mail, we had a long behind the scenes, so a proper short summary.
Love it. All right. Let's talk about it. Part 1.
I'm going to sound like Julie here, but I want to talk about the music.
Hang on. Before we talk about Part 1, did either of you watch the batshit insane Tom Baker introduction from the 1992 VHS release that I uploaded for you guys?
I did
Yes.
not.
In which my main comment was, this just feels like Tom being Tom.
I do particularly love the line of, giant robots, beat you, cock. Like,
Yeah.
what? It's absolutely bonkers.
He's something special. Yes, I did watch it. Yes, that was interesting. I don't need to watch it again.
On the 92 VHS release, that was the style of all the linking narration. It was Tom
dear.
walking around the museum, telling us what happened in all the unfilmed bits.
Oh, no.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Part 1.
All right, music. Yes.
I'm sorry. The way you describe that, it just sounds like listening to like Grandpa Simpson trying to tell a story.
It's not far off.
Yes, the music, no dudders. So I feel like we have to talk about it, even if it wasn't good. But you know what?
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's not bad. Maybe it's hitting that motif a little too often, but it's good.
Yeah, I think I really like the music most of the time. I think you're right. Sometimes it repeats itself. It is a 6-parter, and I think it was trying to go for the motif style. So yes, you're going to get that a little bit, but I don't care because it was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Mark Ayres kind of did a pretty good job at really imitating Dudders, but with a little bit more synth.
He had a little bit more synth. I see where you're going with some of the imitation. When Chris was on his bike, there was some flute music going on, and I was like, yep, that sounds like an homage to Dudders.
I just imagine like a cover album of just his music, an homage to Dudders.
Love it.
So one of the things that happened for me is I didn't go about reading any behind the scenes stuff. I knew that Shada was a semi-missing piece and all of that. I didn't realize how much of it had been filmed.
Yeah.
And so I come in and the first thought I had was, I thought this was all animated. And then obviously we go down and it's like, oh, there wasn't as much animation as I expected there to be.
Yeah, it's probably about half finished would be my guesstimate.
And, you know, the animation is good. I think the quality of the animation is very good.
Yeah, there's some interesting pieces. That first time we get the animation and Chris is cycling down the street, the juxtaposition between Chris looking a little bit more 2D and the background being a little bit more 3D, that was a bit weird. But beyond that, it wasn't too jarring, the cuts between the live action and the animation. They kind of made it work.
It helped that it was pretty much full scenes, just about, of what had been filmed and what hadn't been filmed. So that worked. And then I think any special effects that they had to add in, it wasn't too difficult to put most of that in.
Right.
You know, I was confused. I knew that we were going to watch something that was patchwork, but I also was pleasantly surprised by how much of the original was still there. But then I caught myself so many times looking at certain things, whether, okay, was that like a production shot that was done just recently, or...
There were a couple of things, yeah. For the most part, it's original, but like a couple of Krog scenes, for example, were newer. And I think there was a shot of K9 that was newer, but for the most part, it's original.
So even, let's say, our model work in outer space.
I think some of that is new as well.
Yeah, but I will say that they did an excellent job of making me question it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where it's like, it's good. It looks good, but it doesn't look too good. It doesn't look beyond Doctor Who of 1979.
I was looking at it thinking, well, this looks a bit more like Red Dwarf circa late 1980s than it does 1979 Doctor Who, so suspect that's new. Again, I wasn't 100% certain.
And the other thing, I guess it's because they were outdoors for a lot of these shots and recording on film. Some of the original footage looks incredibly clean and crisp. They must have remastered it or something, because it looks great.
They did for the Blu Ray release.
Okay, that's why, because wow. So I was visually really enjoying myself. I was happy with the animation. Our special effects shots looked very, very good. And then our original stuff looks better than it ever has looked.
Right.
Yeah, they had a lot going on for it.
So let's talk about how part one opens, because we do start with model work. Then we are into the 6 scientists in stasis. And I think when we were talking about City of Death, I'd commented on how that felt like it was a Bristol Boys opening. And to me, this does as well. So I'm starting to think, has Douglas Adams adopted some Bristol Boys stylings?
Well, if he had not been doing too much with Doctor Who, comes in and is trying to figure out Doctor Who, the Bristol Boys have a bit of a legacy going on for them, so it wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, that's fair.
For the most part, like it, but I have to say, guys, wiggling in your seats, you could have done a little bit better job than just wiggling in your seats.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing it's meant to do is to set Skagra up as kind of being menacing. You know, the other 5 guys are having seizures, and he has this scarred face, and he just gets up, puts on the quarantine message, and leaves.
So I get that. It doesn't look like they're in as much pain.
Yeah.
Rather than just wiggling is my problem.
That would have helped. I mean, I understand the purpose of the scene, because if we didn't have this scene, we would have no idea what type of person he is, because I'm going to make the criticism that often happens. There's a whole lot of filler here. And I swear to God, maybe they could have gotten this filmed before the strike if they would have cut it down to 4 episodes and not have all this mindless walking around. We don't need to see it.
Oh, but he's beautiful. I love him. I hate him and I love him. In my opinion, I just think he has the presence to pull it off. And what's nice is that his idea is different from everyone else. Okay, yes, it's a stupid plan. And why in the world would you want everyone to think like you? Because that sounds like a terrifying world to live in. But I appreciated that it wasn't just a take over the universe, which we'll get to, because there was a comment on that in part 5, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, although fundamentally it is take over the universe, but we'll get back to that. I mean, Christopher Neame, I think, is very, very good, but the one problem for me is we've already seen this character this season, and he was played by Julian Glover.
I think they're different.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're different too.
Okay, agree to disagree. We very quickly meet the Professor Chronotis. He's delightful. He's such a delightful, rambling old man.
What I enjoyed is when we have our introduction with him and we see the TARDIS in the back corner of his office. It immediately reminded me of Capaldi's last season.
Yes, I hadn't even thought of that, but yes.
Which now I'm thinking must have been intentional.
Yeah.
I had an initial thought of, I was confused by his non-reaction to the TARDIS.
Mm-hmm.
And then he kept on making these comments about age. And I was like, there's something going on with this man. There were times when throughout this whole story, I was barely a step ahead on some of these things and figuring it out. And it'd be like, oh my gosh, this must be it. And then like 2 minutes later, it's like, yep, there it is. I thought that was
Yeah.
kind of fun.
What you're saying is that you think there may have been something suspicious about Professor Chronotis? They really could have given him a better name. I really find that type of naming.
Professor Time, yeah.
I mean, wow. Professor Fugent, Tempest Fugent, would you? Oh, I can't stand that stuff. It's just too on the nose there.
I do think there was some laziness on Douglas Adams's part, because Krog is just about as lazy a monster name as you can come up with. So, there's that whole thing. He was focused on hitchhikers by this point. He was like,
Yeah.
I'll put some fun stuff in here, but there's some stuff I'm just not going to put too much thought into.
As he should have been, because hitchhikers.
Yeah. Okay. We have the famous punting scene, which does get reused elsewhere, so we'll see that again. And that whole rapport between Romana and the Doctor is wonderful. It's the same as we saw in City of Death.
It felt like a date. It was weird.
It's a bouquet.
You're right. It did.
It's so funny, Reilly. You and me were just like, where's Mary Tam? Can we have Mary Tam back? Actually, it was interesting. I did make some notes as they were doing that, and Skagra comes and like oversees them and all that kind of stuff. I thought there were some sounds and some soundtrack that sounded a little bit like City of Death.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think that's what we're taking from.
Yeah, I think that's very deliberate on Marquez's part, was to evoke that.
And that must be why we had so many long, unnecessary walking scenes outdoors to show where we were shooting.
I want to defend one part of that, and that's the footage of Skagra striding through Cambridge is fucking magnificent. The hat and bag are next level. The cloak and futuristic clothes in 1979 Cambridge, chef's kiss. And he's wearing white heels. He is outstandingly camp in his appearance.
I just assumed that everyone thought he would have been a glam rocker. And the timing is just about right. Am I right? 79?
A little past. It's moved on to punk by now, but yeah, you might have had a few holdovers.
So I love watching some of the animation and finding the little Easter eggs because I saw Zaphod.
What?
Oh.
Yeah, it was written on one of the books.
Ah.
Amazing.
Oh, yeah. I was so excited.
Yeah, I noticed a ton of Easter eggs in a later scene that I think we'll come back to. Yeah, so the other thing is Chris has gone to go get these books. He takes something he shouldn't have, and it's a very strange book.
No harm ever came with opening a book. Okay. Take that, Cambridge Scholars. Oh, wait, sorry. I keep on tying this to things I shouldn't. Okay. I love proper British guys, especially in things like this. So I forget the guy's name, the one who is putting up the posters, I guess, or
Wilkin. Yeah.
Wilkin.
The college porter.
I love him because when Skagra yells out, "You," and he walks over, he's like, "Are you referring to me?" I love it so much. He was being all proper, and it's so cute.
And he also has such a wonderful rapport with the Doctor as well. Yeah, the whole thing. It's enjoyable.
All right, where are we going?
The invisible spaceship. We have an invisible spaceship in the middle of a field. And I just think that's really fucking cool.
It's a great concept when you want to save money.
Yeah.
It's not just about saving money. I think in general, it's kind of a neat idea. The couple of issues about it, right, is obviously the things walking around. I mean, even the Doctor made a comment about the cows. Poor cows. Yeah. But I like the ones that can do cloaking because then you get to at least see the ship once. I think it would have been cool. I think at one point they asked K9 about it and he's like, "Can't you see it? It's big." And I'm like, I want to see it from K9's perspective now. Just a one-shot animated piece would have been really cool.
That would have been fun. I mean, I do like that we do eventually get to see the model work for it. So I completely get that putting this big thing in the middle of a field would have been cost prohibitive. So at least they do give us those model shots later. So we do get to see what it looks like, just not on a real scale.
I imagine seeing things from K9's perspective would be looking around and seeing giant targets on men's crotches.
Nice.
I was thinking about a giant ship that is invisible in a open field, I immediately think of Star Trek 4, but
Oh, yeah.
they did a similar thing, and they did the cute little effect where, the ramp plops down and the person just kind of walks from about 10 feet up in the air and walks down. They did the same little bit there. It's a good bit.
And Shada would have done it 5 years earlier if it had made it to the screen.
Yeah.
Part 1 ends with Skagra on his spaceship making some vaguely threatening sounding statements. We hear the, "What is your command, master?" as this vague monster shape appears on the screen. And that's our cliffhanger. We're into part 2, and there isn't even a fucking resolution to the cliffhanger because there's nothing to resolve.
Yeah, but guess what? This whole thing, Shada, has the perfect recaps because there's barely any recaps, and I love it. Amazing.
See, that's funny. I thought that the recaps at the beginning of part 6 and 5 went a bit long. I thought you would definitely have a comment about that.
Sorry, I apologize. 6 did. 5 was borderline. But
Okay.
yeah, sorry. I did speak too soon there.
I know. I was worried you're getting a little soft on them.
Never.
Part 2, we finally get a little bit of tension because, like I said, this needed to be edited down a lot. But we get some action, we get some tension because we have a giant floating orb. Well, not giant. We just have a floating orb going around, and it's harming people. It's harming a fisherman. It's chasing people. And I think Phantasm actually came out before this, before they would have been written this. So I'm not too certain. I need to figure that out. But this is when it started to interest me.
Phantasm was 79, so yeah, it would have been earlier in the year. So yeah, it may have been an influence on the sphere.
Mm-hmm. And now we have some action. Now the plot's moving forward. Even though we have Chris and Claire now having to figure out what's going on with this book.
And it also gives us some exposition on Gallifreyan stuff without ever taking us there. So as they're searching for the book, the professor reveals that it's the worshipful and ancient lore of Gallifrey, which the Doctor is horrified is not on Gallifrey, asks how it got out of the Panopticon. And as the conversation between the Doctor and Romana goes along, it turns out there are these artifacts from Rassilon's time, and each one of them has tremendous power. And during that conversation, that's where we get Sally Avon's name dropped for the very first time. And the Doctor almost admires him.
That doesn't surprise me at all. Let's be perfectly honest. I am very curious about how it gets resolved because they just let him be, but we'll get there when we get there.
Yeah, I was going to raise that as well. We will get there when we get there. But here's my question here. This didn't air officially. We have a lot of fan wink going on. I know it's Doctor Who, and canon in Doctor Who is as fluid as the breeze, but how do people treat this? Do they treat it as canon or do they not?
I think most people see this as canonical.
Okay. Wow. All right.
Yeah, because it should have been made. And then it's been adapted in like 27,000 different ways.
Okay.
You know, I mentioned Ian Levine. He actually got hold of the filmed bits in the early 80s. And there was a version of it running around conventions for a few years that was the film scenes and then literally like text on a green screen explaining what happened. Yeah, I haven't seen it, but it sounds like it would be painful to watch.
God, they should have done the deep corners of the YouTube reconstruction. Just draw stick figures up there.
I mean, there have been books written to complete it. There's been the Big Finish version. There's this huge love for this story that I can only assume is just because this is so mythical, you know, the only unfinished story. So I think fandom's inclined to see it as canonical. But if anyone listening disagrees, email us and yell at us about it.
It's mythical because it's the unfinished story that has now been finished 3 or 4 different ways.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a question, and this is going to be a really dumb question that has no bearing whatsoever on the story. The professor is asking about tea and is asking about lumps and then asking about sugar. And I was very confused because I thought that saying 2 lumps would mean that you want 2 lumps of sugar, but then Romana requests it with 2 lumps and no sugar, and I am very confused.
It's just an ongoing gag that's not particularly funny.
Oh,
Oh boy.
it's the worst.
I do have a question. So after we get Sally Avon's name dropped, did either of you think that Skagra was Sally Avon?
No.
No.
Okay, interesting, because I think that was meant to be the bluff. I think the script wanted us to think that he was Sally Avon.
Nope. Never thought that.
No.
Okay, interesting. Cool.
I think my reaction was, as it got further and further along, I was like, why haven't we met him yet? And then that's when my head started turning. And when the professor comes back, I was like, ooh, wait a second. And that's when I started to think that it might have been him. And then 2 to 5 minutes later, it was.
Yeah. Okay, Skagra's on the loose. He wants the professor, and the doctor goes off to try and get the book from Chris Parsons. So Romana goes into the TARDIS to get milk for the tea, and that's when Skagra comes in, takes the professor's brain in the sphere, and leaves.
So ironically, he kills the person that he's trying to look for.
Yep.
Yes. I actually really like that because he spends most of the story with what he's looking for already in the sphere.
And he didn't know. Yeah, that is nice.
Everything he does between part 2 and part 6 is completely unnecessary. He's already got what he wants. He can do his plan.
Mm-hmm.
All right, this is where K9 comes in. You know, he comes out the TARDIS and monitors the comatose professor, tells us what happened to him. I think that's quite a terrifying concept, that there's this device that can just effectively steal your brain.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's not
yes.
pleasant. It's not. I don't know what else to say other than, yeah, you're right.
Okay, let's talk about the Doctor and Skagra's encounter.
I love this weird chase sequence that ends up happening. So yes, obviously there's the encounter and the Doctor says Tom Bakery type things.
Doctor, I am Skagra. I want the book. Well, I'm the Doctor and you can't have it.
But I want to talk about the chase sequence more than I want to talk about their interaction, because their interactions later on in the serial makes a lot more sense. But I love the random choir that's singing the Chattanooga Choo Choo.
Yep.
Because why in the world are we singing the Chattanooga Choo Choo? I know Reilly dislikes it very, very much, and I love it. I think it's hilarious. And honestly, it was probably that as they were filming, there was probably a little choir out there, and they're just like, oh, hey, look, we'll film that.
That's exactly what happened, and I love it so hard.
Couldn't the sphere pick off a couple of them while they were singing?
I thought it was going to do that, but what I found hilarious is the Doctor ran in front of those shops and ran through those doors, and then the sphere is following and hits some random person in the head, and they go down.
It knocks over a little old lady.
I'm just like... And the fact that they were telling this extra, hey, you're going to have to go and fall over and pretend that you got hit in the head. What?
Sphere doesn't give a fuck. And of course, in all of this, the Doctor drops the book and Skagra gets the book. But we reach our cliffhanger with the Doctor running down a dead end. The sphere is approaching. Doctor's trying to climb over this gate and failing dismally. Cue the credits. And we're into part 3.
I believe it is in this part where we have the bad turn where Romana gets captured by Skagra.
Hold up. Firstly, the TARDIS rescues the Doctor. So Romana comes, rescues the Doctor. He does a little fist pump. His scarf gets caught in the TARDIS doors as they're leaving. Chef's kiss. Romana being captured isn't until a little further on. The sphere really doesn't give a fuck. Like the guy fishing.
What?
Yeah, fishing guy.
Poor guy.
Firstly, is this the closest we've had to a country yokel in a while?
Yes, it is.
Well, that makes sense as to why the sphere just attacks him for no discernible reason. Such is the burden of the yokel.
See, that's what I was thinking. I thought they were going to do the old Simpsons joke about zombies going for brains, and when they come upon Homer, they turn away and don't eat them because there are no brains. I wonder if that's what the sphere was going to do. It's out there collecting brains, comes up to a yokel, no brains, keep going.
Yeah. We end up on the spaceship. Skagra has the red carpet rolled out for them, very literally.
Why in the world was it a red carpet?
I don't know.
Because he's got pizzazz. Have you seen how he dresses?
It's absolutely something else.
And they, of course, go straight into the break. But meanwhile, we get to see live-action Claire for the first time as well.
She's lovely.
She is. I mean, I'm not a fan necessarily of the characters. I feel they're unnecessary for the story. But Claire, I like.
I mean, without Chris, you don't have the chase for the book.
Yeah.
He serves a purpose. But yeah, Claire is lovely.
Yeah, Claire is lovely, especially when she lets her hair down.
Oh, yeah. And those glasses she's wearing. Oh.
I was going to make a comment on that, and I'm not going to now.
I don't care that they're like late 70s ginormous glasses. They look hot on her, okay?
Yes. I noticed that I'm going to go back to the doctor and everyone, he makes reference to the spheres, and he's asking, I think, K9, and he's like, is the beastie there? And I was like, that has to be a reference to Jamie. Has to 100%.
For those of you filling out your Watchers in the Fourth Dimension bingo cards, you can check off Julie mentions Jamie.
In all honesty, it has been quite a while, so...
It has, but take a shot nonetheless. I've just got to mention Sandifer now.
Oh boy.
That's been a while. It doesn't really go great. But what I like, so we go in between live action and animated quite a bit here, right, as they're on the ship. I actually really like one of the things that they did when it was animated. So Skagra is walking down the hallway, and he takes one step and he goes into shadow. And then the next step he goes into light, and then the next step into shadow. And I actually kind of like what they did there with the lighting for him.
Yeah, I would agree. That's done really well. They make good use of lighting.
Do you also love the fact that Skagra asked the doctor to read to him?
Yes, I did. And the whole thing is in code, and the doctor just insists that he's stupid and has no idea.
I have a question. Is that really what Gallifreyan sounds like? Because
I have no idea.
I kind of hate it.
As far as I know, that's the only time we've heard Gallifreyan being spoken. And equally, it could just be the doctor bullshitting Skagra.
I'm going with the bullshitting.
Yeah, because when Skagra is looking through the doctor's mind in the sphere, he's like, he doesn't know the code. So I'm thinking that's just the doctor bullshitting random noise.
That makes me feel better.
Now, maybe Big Finish has put in actual Gallifreyan into one of their audios, but who knows? There are too many of them these days. I quite like the scenes in the brig with K9 and Chris and Romana.
I would agree.
Particularly the whole, blast, and then K9 shoots. It's cute, it's funny. But yeah, this is really where Skagra starts dragging Romana around for the remainder of the story.
Yeah. Not a fan.
So, two things happen really before the end of this episode. Firstly, Claire going through the professor's stuff, finding machinery, and just starting to play with the controls. Why, Claire? Why?
That was dumb, but I remember watching it and I was like, she didn't quite put the key in, but like she found that key and I was like, is that room a TARDIS? And then she opens up the control panel. I'm like, it is a TARDIS. So I got really excited again.
Love it. And of course, with that, the room is gone and Wilkins gets to open the door and see the void, the blue haze.
Poor Wilkins.
Poor Wilkins. He spends half his day just being a bit bitchy and a bit charming in equal measure. And then lastly, the doctor persuading the ship to do his will because he should be dead.
I do like the ship. It's could have gone in so many poor directions, but it's just right, and it comes in very well at the end. Just a very good balance for that, I guess you would say, a robotic character.
And I do like the banter between them in, obviously, the use of logic and nonsensical logic and how all that went. But my favorite was just how petty the ship did that.
Dead men do not require oxygen. Dang.
So good. I love it so much.
Cliffhanger, part 4.
That whole dialogue right there, that's pure Douglas Adams right there to me, I feel like. Especially, I believe, I can't remember which Doctor Who story, where he once again pointed out the flaws and only looking at things completely logically and not able to look outside of it.
Destiny of the Daleks.
Yeah, he's playing with those ideas here again. All right, part 4.
Jelly babies.
So I couldn't quite pause at the best opportune time.
Oh, no, you didn't do that.
However, I did pause where I got most of them, and yes, there were 10 on screen.
Okay, because I was about to say, I thought our rule is that if we couldn't identify, we just give it a flat 10.
Yes.
We said a whole bag was 10,
Okay.
So Julie has now validated our assumption.
Oh, there you are.
There we go. Good job, Julie.
You're welcome.
I'll have to make sure your bonus is good this year.
That $0 is so good.
I know. Complain to HR.
So it's at this point where there's a lot more animated parts.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to really hear the differences in age.
Yeah, almost all of the characters sound audibly older, except for maybe Chris.
Yes. Romana also sounds much older than Tom does, at least in my opinion. I think part of that just goes with, I think women's voices tend to get deeper. No, they don't always go deeper. Some of them still go higher. They go one direction or the other. They usually don't stay the same. Where I think men's voices have a tendency to stay more of the same, maybe get a little bit lower, but not by much in comparison. Or maybe I'm just used to hearing Tom as being old.
Maybe. I mean, we've done lots of Big Finish with Tom, so we've got used to his 1970s voice and his 2010s voice. So, yeah. This is the episode where we first get a good look at the Krogs.
They're like the Yeti, except not.
Yeah, except they're meant to be, I think, silicon-based life forms.
Really?
Kind of like the Ogre, I guess.
I was pleased that we actually got to see a physical representation.
A live action?
Yeah, instead of just the animation, because when that came up there, I was like, oh no, I'm going to miss a monster. Not to say that it was that great of a monster, but it was okay.
The shot of K9 versus the Krog is newer filmed material. I think that was from 2017.
Okay.
And that did not look good, in my opinion. You could kind of see the underlayer that the actor was wearing underneath the Krog.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas the actual Krog material from the time looks really good, actually.
So really, we just find out that Skagra can create new Krogs. Pronouncing that second R is really hard, everyone. I just thought everyone needs to know that.
In the original, that second R wasn't there, and it was a second A, because that is an anagram of Skagra.
And that would actually make sense to name them that, because I could see Skagra being...
egotistical enough, yeah.
Yes, I absolutely do. But, I don't know. There's just a lot of things going on. I want to get back to the doctor on the ship because I think that's more fun.
Yeah.
I like Skagra, but like every once in a while I'm just like, okay, get on with your plan. Let's keep the ball rolling, everyone. And we do get a reverse the polarity.
Yes.
Oh.
As he's teaching the ship how to improve itself so it can dematerialize and rematerialize and travel quickly. Yes.
Love that.
So that leads us onto the space station where the think tank are based. I really like how distressed they've made it. You know, seeing those same sets that we saw right at the beginning in this dirty, aged form, it looks really good.
There's something about the idea of things in space that are aged and beaten up and worn down. I don't know what it is. It's just, I guess we had been so used to seeing things so crisp and clean and new when they go off to space, and that's oftentimes how things are depicted. And people talk about this all the time about the aesthetic with the first Alien film. But I don't know why we find that so interesting. But yes, I agree with you. I think it's really, really good. And also, I believe it is in this episode that we get the remnants of our old men huddled in the corner. And I don't know what it is, but it is so striking to see everything around you is super space aged, but it's all worn down. And then basically, they look like astronauts that are almost artificially aged forward. It makes your mind run with possibilities.
I have questions about these guys as well.
Yeah.
My biggest one is, so they effectively have no brains. Their brains have been stolen. They're in the same room. What are they eating and drinking?
Yes, that's the question. And then I get that they might not have brains, but I even think that their fingernails wouldn't necessarily just be claws.
You know, I guess that's kind of fairly standard. Let's just age them up.
Right.
Grow the fingernails, long beards, long hair.
They're not eating anything or drinking anything because no brains.
I know plenty of old people who don't have long fingernails. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Yes, same.
I was just saying is that they're not hungry because they have no brains.
I mean, they have to eat something. They have to drink something. They have to go to the toilet at some point, for God's sake.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where to show what it would really look like would be properly horrific.
Yeah. All it needed was a line about, you know, advanced thought being gone.
Or maybe a line about, you see, how many of it? It's 5 of them. 4 empty suits and just one guy.
Oh no. Oh no.
We don't get all Donner Party on this, please.
Yeah.
All right. There had been mention of some other things, and I don't like when the Doctor gets all like haughty and hoity-toity over people from Earth. And I actually like a scene that's later on with Chris kind of talking about that. But the Einstein, Newton, Planck, like, forget all them. They're all dumb. I'm like,
you've got a lot to unlearn.
Yeah.
Whenever the Doctor does that, there's a part of me that kind of gets it. But then the other part of me is like, get over yourself. We know, Doctor, we know that you're smarter, but these people are not you.
Yeah. So these 5 old boys, they're supposedly the greatest intellects of their generation, and Skagra puts them all to shame. He gets described as a geneticist, astroengineer, cyberneticist, neurostructuralist, and model theologian. That's quite the resume.
Model theologian.
Yeah, that's my favorite.
That one kind of felt out of left field to me.
Modeling out the gods.
I guess.
Some intense spreadsheets going on right there.
It's a wonderful look, and it's a great background on the character. I wish we could have learned a little bit more about our 5 old men that look like they're in a old country music band, but we're never going to find out, really. It's a shame. I actually was really interested in that, but now they're just kind of a death count.
I actually really like that we don't actually find that much out about Skagra either. Until the very end, we don't find out where he came from. We find that out right at the end of part 6. We don't really find out what motivates him beyond having this idea of projecting himself into everyone.
Yeah, that's the most interesting thing about it is, and of course we'll go into the detail more, his goal I find interesting because it is different for the show. But I would like, as you've pointed out, to know more as to what is his drive to do that. Maybe not intellectually, but maybe emotionally would be interesting to me. Maybe there's something there.
And I think the thing is, Douglas Adams he's not interested in telling that story. He wants to tell the story of Sallyhaven and what the Time Lords do with their prisoners. Skagra just needs to use that. So there's nothing else to Skagra beyond that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's very interesting in the way that he writes that.
I mean, it's a shame. You would think there'd be a very interesting, emotional person there behind what he's wearing.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So we're approaching the end of part 4. K9 has been fighting this Krog and no longer has the power to do it. And so he bursts into the control room, followed by the Krog, which is glowing red. And that's our cliffhanger, and we're into part 5.
It's resolved by a strange, Chris, distract him. I'll go to the other side thing. What is going on?
It's like Chris is about to try and take on the Krog in fisticuffs, while the Doctor tries to shield the old boys.
Yeah, it's not the best laid out thing. I think they could have done a better job with that.
Also, what happens to those old boys? I'm assuming the Krog kills them.
Well, I mean, the whole place blows up, so it's either one or the other, right?
Those poor guys.
I know.
I mean, maybe with the sphere at the end, their brains could have been restored, but no, they're dead.
Restored to somewhere, not in those bodies.
Yeah. Oh, boy. So I do have a note on here. Claire with her hair down and those glasses on. Yes.
Just yes.
Yes.
See, Anthony, the problem is my comment was going to be, my mom had a pair of glasses like that.
Oh.
And there you go.
Mm.
So have we gone into detail about Skagra stealing the TARDIS?
No, Skagra stole the TARDIS. Thanks.
And the TARDIS is just like working with him?
Yeah, we get that later, I'm sure.
There's a implication about the relationship between the TARDIS and these Time Lord artifacts. So as Skagra flips through the book, it controls the TARDIS.
That just seems so bizarre that these machines that they have, all of them would be in tune with these artifacts.
Yeah.
Well, there's this comment about the artifacts and their relationship with time. So to me, it makes sense given that it is a time machine.
I guess.
Best not to think about it too hard. Yeah.
So one thing on the animation here is we're on the carrier ship. Those Krog breeding tanks, they are so moody and atmospheric. Like that entire scene. Could they have pulled that off in 1979?
They may not be able to pull that off, but I can't hold back. God, I really wish the prison was live action and not animation. I would have loved to see what it looked like. Why
Yeah.
is it that it feels like the 2 times of getting a wacky motley crew of aliens and villains together, those things either were never made or they were lost? I'm thinking Dalek's Master Plan. It's like, God, I want that scene so bad. I want to see that.
Yeah, and can you imagine? I bet they would have reused some costumes. Like maybe there'd have been a Zygon in there or something.
Oh, man, maybe they could have brought the evil Christmas tree back in, man. That would have been
Yes.
awesome.
That would have
Yeah.
been brilliant.
I'm still happy that we have a scene like that, and the animation did okay with giving me a little variety of aliens, but I'm getting ahead of myself. That's episode 6.
We sort of see them at the end of this episode.
Okay.
I just found it interesting that it was a Time Lord prison and just the number of non-Time Lords. Why is the rest of the universe being like, hey, Time Lords, why you keep stealing our people?
Yeah, it's...
Interestingly, Douglas Adams had predominantly human villains from history intended. So he wanted Lucretia Borgia, Boadicea, Lady Macbeth, Rasputin, Nero, and Genghis Khan,
Is this the Earth Wing of the Time Lord prison?
and then a couple of space monsters as well. That was what Douglas Adams had envisioned.
Also, having Lucretia Borgia, just mind-blowing to me that someone would think to choose that person.
Yes.
Yeah. When you think of all of history, really? That one?
Yeah.
I'm glad that didn't happen.
We're on Shada, and yes, Julie, I agree. It would have been cool to see what they'd done to realize that on screen. I do think it's a pretty cool concept that Sally Avon has induced all of the Time Lords to forget about Shada.
Yeah.
And it's clear that because the older Time Lords, like the Doctor, knew about it when they were younger, like for the Doctor, it's still there. Someone mentions Shada and he's like, oh, that sounds familiar. Whereas Romana has no clue. Romana has literally never heard it. So it's with that kind of generational gap, the younger Time Lords have never even heard of it. And with the older ones, it's somewhere in the back of their memories. And to me, the implication is at some point in his youth, the Doctor encountered Sally Avon.
Oh, most likely.
So he had his mind wiped.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, the college professor kind of decor, sweet little old man who's actually a Time Lord. Does anyone remember a certain David Tennant, 10th Doctor master reveal that was very similar to this?
Oh, yes. Yes.
So once again, I feel like a lot of New Who has been perhaps picking at little bits from this serial and using it. Just a hunch.
Yeah,
I like it.
I think that's plausible. So we have an absolute amateur move from the Professor. Firstly, he's revealed himself to Claire and then says, don't tell anyone. And then the first thing Claire does is tell Chris. Come on, Claire. And then when Skagra says, where is Sally Avon when his cell is empty, the Professor reveals himself. That's such an amateur move, Professor. What are you doing? Could
Yeah.
have just stayed quiet.
Well, I mean, he had died and then kind of sort of came back.
Mm-hmm.
So take that as you will.
Fair.
Yeah, I'm not too sure about the Time Lord dying and not regenerating bit in this story. Maybe I'm missing something.
The implication is he was on his last regeneration. So he had run out. And so
Okay.
that was meant to be him dying, which is interesting that he disappears rather than just dies as we perceive dying.
Right.
Well, I thought in one of the previous stories there had been someone who disappeared when they died.
Yeah, I think it was it in Planet of the Spiders?
I think so.
That sounds right.
But then later, and going into New Who, when the Master dies at the end of Last of the Time Lords, it's his body. So super inconsistent, I guess.
Sounds about right for Doctor Who.
Yeah, it really does.
Yes, he does reveal himself when he probably shouldn't have revealed himself. So he gets mind wiped a second time?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why he felt the need to do that, because he already had the Professor's brain.
Which, I don't know, maybe it's just the absurdity of the line, but Skagra going, sphere, reminds me of Matt Berry going, bat,
Sphere?
sphere.
K9 shooting the sphere as well.
Right.
K9.
Yeah, and it looks good. The animation, once again, this is particularly the shot in the animation that really sticks out to me. That looks real good.
It's a shame that these are probably the most ambitious scenes, because to me, just thinking back to when we were talking about the Horns of Nimon, part of what they sacrificed on the budget for the Horns of Nimon was to make this story really good. And I want to know how they would have done this, right? We're okay with the Horns of Nimon being kind of shit because we want everyone to forget about it and remember Shada. Would Shada have looked good enough to actually be okay with that, you know?
The world will never know.
Yeah.
Part 6.
Part 6?
Part 6, we've got the prisoners approaching the doctor. That's our cliffhanger. And K9 to the rescue.
And super long recap.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to talk about the, for lack of a better term, zombies. Because that's what they act like. I'm a little disappointed, to be perfectly honest.
Because it's mind control?
So from what I had tried to understand about what Skagra was really trying to get to, I didn't think that he was looking for just mind control, right? I saw it more of like an implantation of his mind, or at least like the personality traits or something along those lines is really what I was looking to, because I'm like, well, I mean, the master could do mind control. Why is that so cool? Because it's not. So I was actually a little disappointed in that they just acted like zombies.
Yeah.
Is it mind control or is it mind stealing?
So he's stolen minds to begin with, but once he's got Sally Avon's mind in there, he can implant his mind into everyone else and control everyone in this Gestalt entity.
Okay. Right. Okay.
Because I viewed it a little bit more, not exactly, but like in New Who. We keep going back to New Who in this one.
Mm-hmm.
But when the master creates actual copies of himself and everyone just is the master, I wasn't expecting that, but I was expecting something a little bit more than just zombified people.
I think your argument, Julie, is Skagra's plan here is just hypnotism mind control with extra steps.
Yes. I don't understand. It just seems very odd to me that this was his goal, was just, I can just control everyone, because controlling everyone or having your mind in someone else's mind just seemed different to me.
Right. And it's a shame because I thought the way he was describing it, he kept using the term like a universal mind, one mind.
Mm-hmm.
I guess this is my ignorance here. I thought he meant like one collective consciousness.
Like a hive mind?
Yeah, that's why I thought he was going with it. And it reminded me of, I don't think this is spoilers because it's been out for a very long time, that whole concept of, well, for him, he's doing the universe. This show was about doing it for everyone on Earth. There's no aliens, just human beings. Was Neon Genesis Evangelion. Yeah, I'm making an anime reference. They also had an idea to do something like that. And that delved into the idea of what is identity, what is separation from a person, how is that positive, how is that negative. Of course not, I wasn't going to get something like that from this, but I was hoping for maybe, and this is where I was hinting at with Skagra's emotional state. I wanted to know if there was an emotion motive for him wanting to do this, to put everyone together, because I think that would have been very interesting. But we have just, I want to control everything. I mean, at that point, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's better than just basic, universe domination.
To some extent, still is universe domination. He just becomes the universe rather than having the universe bent to his will.
He's going to get really bored doing all the mindless work to keep the universe, churning. Having to do it for every single entity, for every single living entity. That's a bit much.
Yeah, seems like a real hassle to me.
Yeah.
No, thank you. So we have this big battle. Well, let's actually talk about first. They're all locked out of the Doctor's TARDIS and they're in the Professor's TARDIS as the Doctor's TARDIS heads to Shada. And there's this whole scene where, again, we get kind of a tunnel for the Doctor to be able to cross. And Claire kind of messes it up, but whatever, because she burns her hand. But the room where the Doctor arrives in the TARDIS, this is the little Easter eggs the TARDIS pointing out, because we see Polyphase Avatron, we see a Magellan handgun, there's a cyber head in there, and then there's that penis-y looking device from the Time Monster.
And
I'm sure there are other things that I missed as well. But those are the things I noticed. Anyone see anything in addition to those?
I mainly just saw the Cyberman head.
Okay. But yeah, so there he pulls together a device, he MacGyvers something so that he can also assert control over the zombies.
Yep.
leads us into our finale. It's just a battle of wits that ends with fundamentally the Doctor winning because the Krogs are exploding, which distracts Skagra. Yeah, it's all this big thing. I don't see a lot to discuss in that, to be honest.
No, I agree.
No, there's not. But I love that we get more live action at the end because it's lovely.
Yes. So let's talk about, firstly, Skagra going back to the ship.
Yeah, that is wonderful. That is nice touch.
I do wonder if he just dies in that cell.
I think he does.
Yeah, I would venture to say yes.
Rough.
If the ship doesn't drive him crazy, he'll go insane first.
Wilkins is back with a policeman.
Oh, poor Wilkins.
Poor Wilkins. He might have gone a bit insane after this. So that leads to the whole scene where everyone except the Doctor and Romana gets taken down the station after the TARDIS dematerializes.
So question.
Yes.
So we all find out that he is an escaped convict, the professor is.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just going to let that be?
And he's
Well,
not
you know,
just
he's
the only escape convict. I mean, he's the great Sally Avon, right?
But he's such a nice old man.
It just seems, I guess I could have been okay if there was a little bit more exposition around it. I just think they kind of just left it there. Even if it was something as simple as Romana potentially just asking the Doctor, hey, why didn't we do anything about Sally Avon, and him having a response, I think that would have been enough for me.
Yeah, I can see that.
And again, I love him and I don't want to see him go back to prison. I just want to see a little exposition as to why they let him be free. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
My assumption is, aside from Sally Avon, I assume the Doctor and Romana do take the book back to Gallifrey and let the Time Lords know, hey, you got to go sort out these prisoners that are on the loose. That's my assumption.
So then the Time Lords are on a wild goose chase trying to find Sally Avon because he's going to remain missing. Okay, I like
True.
that. I like that. Because the Time Lords are the worst. And so if we can cause them some heartache, then I'm all up for it.
Show those dicks who's boss.
Absolutely, 100%.
All right, let's talk about the very last scene, because this is where we get old Tom.
Oh, yeah. I had no idea I was going to see that. And I was pleasantly surprised. I think that I'm a bit more receptive to this when it's this particular situation where it's a scrambled, put together production for something that should have aired that never did. And I think, yes, this is a perfect time to do this.
See, Julie, it sounded like you were a little more irritated by it.
Well, I'm kind of okay with it, except for the fact that, again, Tom had to go be Tom.
You knew he was never going to agree to do it unless he was going to be able to go full Tom.
And that's why it's one of those situations where I'm like, I do agree that this is the one scenario where I am okay with it because of the background of the story. But every once in a while, I'm just like, still just Tom, calm your tits.
Yeah.
I want to know, how did people react to this? Was this leaked at all? Probably. It's Doctor Who, everything is leaked.
I don't think it was leaked.
Ah.
I don't recall it being leaked.
I bet that would have blown people's minds when they saw that first time.
Yeah, I think people were quietly happy about it. I don't think it was like this big, oh my God, it's Tom. But, you know, by this stage, he'd already fully re-engaged with Doctor Who. He'd shown up as the curator in 2013. So this is 4 years after that. My understanding, though, was with the Day of the Doctor, he did not want to be in his costume.
Okay.
He specifically said, I don't want to wear the Fourth Doctor's costume. So this probably took a little bit of convincing to get him into the coat and scarf again. But I think it's a nice touch, you know, if you're going to do this like little reimagining, the dialogue at the end is not too different from what was in the original script. So everything about I suspect that sometime in the future, maybe about 200 years' time, someone will meet me and say, is that really the Doctor? He seemed like such a nice old man. That was in the original script. So that wasn't written just for Tom.
Yeah, that works perfect.
I suspect the laughing into the camera, that was probably Tom's call.
Oh, that's Tom.
But yeah, before we wrap this one up, just a nice little story. So Daniel Hill, who played Chris Parsons, when he was working on this, him and one of the production assistants, Olivia Bazalgette, met, fell in love, and got married. Which I just always thought was cute. Anyway, all right, should we wrap this one up?
Yeah.
Firstly, camp count. We've got to give some points for Skagra's outfit, plus the hat and the bag. Amazing.
Hat in the bag, yeah, that definitely bumps it. I'll go 4.
4 was what I was thinking.
Okay.
Guys, this was a pretty camp season. We'll cover that in the recap, but this was a camp season. All right, scores. And Julie, you have the privilege of going first this time.
Oh boy. I enjoyed a lot of aspects about this. Again, I was very pleasantly surprised by how much live footage still existed. And like Reilly said, how good it looked. Knowing, yes, there's some remastering and stuff going on, but hey, that's fine. The animation style was good. The music that we decided to add was good. Most of the special effects, great. Is it a little bit long of a story? A little bit. Could you tell that Douglas Adams didn't quite care as much as Hitchhiker's Guide as he did with Shada? Yes, you could tell that too. But I still really rather enjoyed this one. It's definitely, I think, would have been better as the season finale. So I'm glad that we were able to recover most of it. I am going to give it 8 poor random fishermen who died out of 10.
Wow. All right, Reilly, what have you got?
This is a strange viewing because it's very disjointed to it being patched together like a quilt. But to me, that makes it more interesting because there was a lot of filler in this story. A lot. I was going to say Claire and Chris particularly, but we all seem to very much like Claire, so I will not be mean to her. I'll just be mean to Chris. I'm thinking this could have been cut down to maybe 4, definitely 5 parts. I enjoyed the look. The story was okay. I wouldn't say it was anything outstanding. I think that the fact that it went unaired, unable to be completed, has probably made people like the story more than it deserves. It is fine. It is better than what we've been seeing recently on the show. That's a great change. Very happy about that. But I'm going to end up giving this one 6.5 great mind revolutions out of 10.
Okay. And that leaves it with me. And yeah, this is such a curiosity. It's really interesting for us to approach it as if it were the season finale, even though obviously in real life it wasn't. And yeah, it's a huge lift on where we have been this season. Aside from City of Death, this season has been pretty consistently poor in comparison to previous seasons, no matter how much I will stand up and defend Nightmare of Eden. But this would have been, I think, a pretty worthy season finale, probably better than the last 2 that we've had, being the Invasion of Time and the Armageddon Factor. There are some great concepts in here. I do love the idea of Sally Avon. I do really love the idea of Skagra just being this guy. He's no one particularly special other than having a grand plan and the means to implement it by being super smart. But there's no legendary backstory or anything like that behind him. The Cambridge University setting, a lot of fun. It gives us characters like Wilkins. It gives us the lovely, lovely Claire. And, you know, yeah, there's some of Tom being Tom, but it's quite fun. He does feel a bit reined in comparison to what we have seen earlier in the season. I do think with Horns of Nimon, they just said go for it, and he realized it wasn't as much fun as he thought it would be. So he's toned down here, and it really works for me. So, yeah, this is definitely a highlight of the season. Oh, and obviously the Professor. The Professor's just delightful and wonderful, even if he was a master criminal in his time. So I think for me, this is going to be 7.5 flying disco balls out of 10, which gives us a story average of 7.33. It is our second best story of the season based on our ratings. We will cover all of our ratings and averages and all that kind of stuff next time when we do our season retrospective. But this was Shada, guys. We've done it. We've done the legendary missing story.
Woo!
As said, we'll be back next time. As always, thank you so very much for listening in. And until next time, have a good one. You have been listening to Watchers in the Fourth Dimension with Reilly Schreck, Julie Philippek, and myself, Anthony Williams. This episode, Such is the Burden of a Yokel, was recorded on Wednesday the 25th of September 2024. If this is your first time listening into the show, all of our previous episodes are available wherever you like to get your podcasts. You can interact with us on Facebook, Instagram, and X at Watchers4D, and you can also email us at watchers4d@gmail.com. If you're enjoying the show, please do subscribe and consider leaving us a review or rating on your favourite podcasting app. All of those things really do help the show. And always remember, beware the sphere, beware Skagra, beware Shada.